Welcome back to our third installment into our review of the February 15th chess tournament at Bryant. This was my third round against my opponent named Jan, who had the black pieces. Jan is 38, and it was his very first chess tournament, so he is unrated, but he was also 2-0 going into this round. He played two extremely fast games. He won both games in under 30 minutes. And I was a little bit scared going into this round. Jan looked like a very scary opponent because he's completely unrated. Can't tell how good he's going to be, but everyone else he's played has been, he's honestly just dominated them. And so it seemed like he was in the wrong section, like he was going to just simply win easily. So I knew I had a tough match on my hands, and honestly, I wouldn't gain any rating even if I did beat him. So it's kind of a tough situation to be in, but you still have to play the game nonetheless. And I opened with d4, hoping to get our normal London setup, and he plays b6, trying to fianchetto his bishop, and probably going for one of these e6, b6 setups on a Queen's Indian. Now, against the London, these setups usually transpose into a normal position where Black ends up playing d5, and I get to play more of my game more than he plays his. So typically I'm more comfortable in these positions. So we develop our bishops and set up our structures. Now, from here, we each develop our knights. Notice that he is fighting for the light squares, and I am fighting for the dark squares. So we're each taking our own approach, not really interacting with each other up to this point. I am trying to make sure that nothing gets planted here immediately, and he goes ahead and tries to recapture control of that square. Now I am going to keep fighting, keep my sight lines open, and he is trying to push me down and make me retreat, but I'm just going to set up our tent. That way if he ever pushes, I can retreat and still keep my eyes on this diagonal. Now he simply develops, and the motif in the London is once you have full control of the e5 square, you can plant your knight there, and even if knight takes, now your pawn forces their knight out of position, and this knight is typically a very strong defender of the king. So this king will be in some trouble eventually once that knight moves. Now I want to reinforce my center, bringing both the knight and the bishop. Now things are beginning to open up. I'm seeing that this bishop has a pawn that can move in front of it, and we'll have open sight lines pretty soon. And so there are tactics with this bishop, but I am just going to continue. Bishop e7 prepares castling, and to dissuade his castling, I am going to push my pawn, showing him that I am ready to attack if he ever moves his king. This way, if he castles, he's going to go straight into my attack, and if he doesn't castle, since his knight is no longer playing this key defensive role, I will be able to attack him on the light squares that he has destabilized. Now, f6, further destabilizing his light squares, but my queen cannot get planted because my knight's in the way. So the best decision I have here is just to take his trade, and now he's left with a weakness on e6 that is called a backwards pawn. That means it's a pawn with whose neighbors are in front of it, so that it has no one defending him from behind. Those pawns are typically weak, especially when they're left pushed forward. So typically the way you play attacking backwards pawns is blockading the square so they can't move forward and building up pressure on the square where they actually are. So my two moves that I considered here were knight to e5 and knight to g5. If I play knight to g5, then I begin attacking the pawn, and since I already have okay control, he can't push it forward, and so he would need to defend, and I would try and stockpile pressure. I didn't like this move so much because I thought that eventually he could rally his resources and create some counterplay eventually. So I went with blockading the pawn totally, not letting it move whatsoever. However, in this position, I got tunnel visioned on this weak pawn and didn't notice a nice tactic on the king. In this position, we can force the king to move because the bishop can't block or else it will be taken. The knight tries to block, then I'm going to hop my knight in and bring some pressure. And if this king moves, now his rook is going to be trapped in the corner. So I choose this move. These light square weaknesses are still going to be a problem in the future, and I have this in mind. In this position, he tries to get aggressive and sacrifice his pawn. The computer obviously hates lines like this, especially because of all of your Swiss cheese light squares. But you're opening up a direct attack already. And so the thing that I'm focused on right now is attacking these light squares. Obviously, nothing can block, or else it will be taken. So I play bishop to b5. Nothing can block, so it forces his king to move. Now, in this position, I know I'm doing well, but I just have to find how. Now, I considered moves like queen to b3, attacking a pawn, and taking in the center or protecting my pawn. I figured that just protecting my pawn is too slow because he will start breaking through. And now I can't really castle when he does that trade because I'll be so open. And he might be able to trade off queens and bring us into an endgame. So if we trade off queens, then his king being in the middle actually doesn't matter so much as a weakness because I won't have enough pieces to hurt him with. So I want to keep my queens on the board and I want to get my king to safety. So my most logical move is queen to b3, but I think that he can just play his bishop, and if I move my pawn, he takes for free, and now my queen no longer sees what it was threatening, and he's kind of stonewalled behind his own pawns. So I didn't like that. That ends up being the best approach, is getting the queen out and castling quickly, allowing him to take a free pawn so that my rook has sightlines on his king. I didn't quite understand that, and instead I opt for a much more aggressive move that I calculated for about 15 minutes. Knight to c6. Now, here the obvious idea is if you don't take my knight, well, I'm threatening a fork, so I'm going to be winning at least a bishop for a knight, typically a good trade. If you do take my knight, well, now my bishops are laser beaming down this side of the board. Your rook can't really move anywhere. In fact, it will be trapped with nowhere to go. And if you were to move your queen, can't move it to any of these dark squares, and you don't want to pin yourself. So I honestly figured that because of the fork, he'd be forced to take, and then we would trap his rook. And I did not see the continuation that he chose, queen to d5. This is a clean refutation. You see the computer says we're back down to equal. It's actually going to be a little worse than that because right now my knight is under attack, so it must move. And can't really move back because then things are going to be taken for free and I'm going to be bullied. Obviously can't move anywhere over here. So the only way that I see out, or actually I calculated queen a5, but assumed that after takes and rook to d8, things are getting dire for my king. The computer doesn't hate it, but I choose to take and try and get out, take my bishop pair that is crisscrossing around his position. Now he plays a intermezzo, a move in between capturing back, because if I try to escape in any way, he will take my rook for free and then take my queen. So we have to protect the rook. We can protect using offense or using defense. I choose a more defensive route because I thought that if I push up, he will check me, trade our queens, and I will lose my attacking chances. That's probably the better move. I should bail out at this point. Just say, I'll take my draw. But I like to hold on to my winning chances as long as I can. He captures back my knight, and here my main plan is to castle as quickly as possible and make sure his queen is offsides, because this king in the center, bishops are very, very close. He has very little oxygen. Going to be tough for him to survive practically, even if the computer can see through all of the threats. So I decide, let's open up the center if that's where his king is going to be. I would love to just take and mate him. That would make me very happy. However, my opponent won't let me win that easily. He will pin my pawn to my queen. I thought this was actually a very poor move. I thought that right now he's giving me precious, precious time to escape and be able to eventually get my queen out and castle. I noticed that we're going for takes, and shredding my own king open. So I play sort of a phantom threat. My idea is bishop to e5, not only defending but also threatening to take, and zoom out to h5 with threats on his pawn and his 7th rank. This is very much so a bluff. I don't have much here. He can really shred me open and make my life very unpleasant. But luckily, he chooses not to, and he actually spends about 25 minutes thinking here. It is a complicated position. There's a lot going on. And so he decides on queen e4, centralizing the queen, setting up tactics on my king, so that now, after it takes, that there is a pin on this pawn, so that if my queen ever moves, he'll be able to take. Now, I knew this move wasn't particularly good, but it does prevent the initial idea of takes and queen to h5, because the queen will simply retreat to g6. So I take a look here, and I'm noticing that although this bishop's doing a great job, it can be moved back with tempo and recreate our threats over on the king side. So I will attack his queen for free and gladly give up a pawn. Now, this is a free pawn, and I see that, but notice the evaluation. The computer thinks it is about equal. That means that there is proper compensation. There's a proper attack on this side of the board, even though I am down a pawn. Now, here I'm going to continue my ideas of swarming this king and getting castled. And I will play queen a4, also noticing that these queens are on the same rank, so that I will be able to set up some discovered attacks in the future. Hopefully, with tactics on his queen, see if things will work out that way. And he plays knight to d5, giving me back some advantage, not addressing any of the tension in the center. My opponent told me after the game that he was thinking that opening the center is bad for him because of all of my swarming pieces around his king. I thought something similar, but it should be noted that my king is also in the center, so you can't play scared, you have to be aggressive. Now, this move comes with some ideas. The most obvious is threatening to take on e3 due to the pin. So the way that I choose to address this threat is bring my bishop back with tempo on his queen, and he simply moves out of the way. Now, this move makes me excited because now I am going to be lining up some threats on this diagonal. I just need a way to protect this square. And I notice that my queen can protect this square, so my first and the move I wanted to play the most is simply pawn takes, with the idea of takes back, and I win the game. Now, I couldn't make myself play this move in the game because I'm starting to get low on time, and I'm starting to second guess. I'm thinking that in this position he will, obviously you'll see something like that, and yes, I will gain a pawn, but this rook gets a lot more scary when it's looking at an undefended bishop. And my king is starting to feel a little exposed in the center. So, without thinking, I calculate that this may or may not work, but I don't like my king in the center, so I move him out of the center. And I miss the brilliant move, knight takes e3, fully sacrificing his knight and putting it away for free, with the idea that if I take it, his queen will come in with check, my king will be forced to move, and he will capture a bishop. Now, computer evaluates it as equal, probably because of all of these open lines around the king. It thinks that I can find some counterplay and recapture some pawns or create a draw with a perpetual check. I, however, am not a computer and almost will never go 3 pawns down for no reason. Unless I see something concrete, then 3 pawns is a losing situation. So in this position, I find a fancier move, slightly worse by the computer, but it's important to note that moves like this destabilize your opponent's psychological thinking. Instead of giving them what they want, you're forcing them into what you want. And I think that this move was actually the turning point of the game. It gave me reassurance, and it really took my opponent into a spot of thinking that he was winning for sure, to thinking that maybe he had made a mistake. Now, obviously in this position, I'm also considering reopening this threat, but the problem is that now any knight move comes with check, and now any knight move comes with check, and so I can't do anything but address this. Now, I pin his queen to his king with no protection, using my bishop as a distraction so that I can take his knight and open up my files. Computer thinks it's fine, half a point, not really a big deal. He has 2 pawns up, so if I'm not creating active counterplay, I will simply lose to his passed pawns pushing down and becoming queens. So here I know I have to be as active as possible acting against his king, and he helps me out by opening up his center a little bit. In fact, the biggest mistake was opening up this nice dark square diagonal. The winning move here is queen to a3 because it protects this bishop and attacks the king, and I will use my rooks to hunt him out even after he blocks. I choose a similar idea, but because I don't have enough time on the clock, I can't calculate everything out, and I give him this check. Ultimately, not a great move, but it has a similar threat line, although things don't work out because this bishop ends up being destabilized. However, I can't see that deeply, and in this position, I am struggling to figure out what to do. I'm considering playing e4, just cutting off his queen and threatening to win the rook. And I'm noticing that my rooks are going to encapsulate this king and hopefully swarm him soon. So I need to keep on the pressure, keep going, keep pushing him as hard as I can, hoping that eventually he will make a mistake And here I spot another tactic, another distraction, where I will sacrifice my rook completely so that if he moves anywhere, my queen will take his rook. So he's forced to take mine, and I will take his. Now his king sits on the open file. My rook is threatening to come and attack, team up with my queen and my bishop, forcing him into the corner where only his queen will defend, and I will have all of my material crashing down onto him. This is where he gets a little spooked. He is obviously completely winning, as the computer indicates. He should simply trade off his pieces and push his pawns. But he is supremely scared by this idea of rook check and swarming his king on the king side. So he moves his queen down to h3 with the idea that after rook check and move, my queen will not be able to take on e6 and force his king into the corner. However, this move did not address the other threat in the position, which was queen onto the 7th rank, forking his pieces. And after actually before this, he checks my king and I move over. Doesn't change anything in the position. When he plays queen to h3, I still am able to check him and win a bishop for free. And in this position, he plays e5, a fancy move, opening up his defense back to his rook, but he does not recognize how dire the threat on his king is, because after he pushes thinking he's safe, I sacrifice on g6, renewing a threat on h7, and if he takes, then my pieces are going to swarm. So he plays king to h8, hoping that there is some life left in the position for him, but luckily I have one last resource. Rook to h1, defended by my queen on the opposite side of the board, as they team up in a big right triangle to attack the king. As we're getting low on time, he has about a minute left here, and he sacrifices his rook to try and survive, and he plays e4, trying to cut off my vision so that I cannot renew my threat, but I'm able to ladder mate him on the back of the board, and as he sacrifices his queen, I do not accept it, and I checkmate him in the corner. So this leaves me with 3 out of 3. I am won every one of my games, so that means in my last round I'll be going against the only other person who is 3 out of 3, and if I can make a draw, then we both win, and if I win, then I will take away a sole victory. Very proud of this game. There were ups and downs, but it was a good fighting game. Lots of piece activity, even if it wasn't supported by the computer. And I think the psychological pressure of getting off tactics, even if they aren't technically sound, makes the opponent feel like they're going wrong. And after one mistake, causes them to second guess all of their other decisions, and it causes them to move slowly and make poor decisions. So I feel like seeing these fancy moves, making things that are unexpected, helps in ways that aren't just the position. But yeah, that was my third game. Be very excited to show my fourth and final game of the tournament. You already know the result, but that game was fun and has some added context. So